casual intro. The fact that we're like together for the
Oh
first
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, everybody, this might be a little strange seeing me and Dave on the same screen now, but we're both back in Edmonton. Dave's back from Singapore, and I'm back on a week vacation from Montreal. So we found a good day here to meet up, and we thought we would do some recordings together in the same room. So I know it's pretty strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we are.
Actually, Tyler and I were saying how strange it is because I'm so used to like Tyler talking, and then I get a break, and then I look at the screen. But now I'm like, do I look at you when we're talking, or do I look at the screen?
Look here, look here.
I'm actually not so sure. Yeah. But we're having fun with it either way. Do you want to start with the intro, or should I start with the intro?
You can. All right, I'll kick us. Actually, the last two intros I kicked off, so I'll let you kick off this time. Yeah.
All right. So today on the podcast, we have Karina Sapelnikova, who is a University of Alberta graduate from mechanical engineering and has also graduated from her master's program in France. And now she's in Germany working for Rocket Factory as a propulsion engineer. It was quite an interesting interview. I had known Karina from when we were basically bachelor students, and I think Tyler also knew Karina as well from bachelor students. Definitely somebody who's like super ambitious, always like, pushing the bar and going farther, and like very impressive. She shared a lot about her kind of journey to this point and some of the transitions and things that she's faced, and kind of maybe some of the adversities at certain points too. Any thoughts on the interview, Tyler?
I thought that it was really interesting. She does a lot of amazing stuff academically and career-wise now, but it was all within the context of, she was always moving, like her family was moving, and then she's moved for work and her master's and everything like that. So if you're looking for advice about what it's like to be an expat, or if you're thinking about like going to school somewhere else or taking a job that's in a different country away from your family and stuff like that, she is for sure the person to listen to, because she also speaks a little bit about her why, and why it's kind of driving her to keep on moving and going to different places and stuff like that. And so it seems like she's got a really strong compass for why she's doing that. And there's a lot of good advice on how to make those adjustments and everything like that. So if you're looking for that type of advice, I think this is an excellent episode, on top of the fact that, she's doing some really amazing things in the rocket industry right now. And she's made some huge efforts to develop the rocket industry in Canada as well, just in her own spare time. So she's clearly a very driven person, does rocket science as the day job, and then a bunch of stuff on top of that. So she's a good one to listen to for sure. Yeah.
And actually today we tried something a little bit new. So Karina wanted to make a presentation and kind of share through her presentation. So we thought we'd just give it a shot. Hope you guys enjoy the new format. Maybe this is something we'll do more in the future, but just let us know if you have feedback.
Yeah.
And here we go. Here's to Karina.
Anyway, Karina, please, the floor is yours.
All right. So can you see okay?
Yeah,
we're good.
Actually, sorry, Dave, let's just introduce Karina real quick. That might be a little bit better just to kick things off, and then she can get going in her presentation.
Let's do it.
Intro for her.
Hey, Tyler, the ground is yours. Give it.
Okay, right on. Thanks. So today we're really happy to have Karina on the TrailBlazers podcast. She has a great career in the aerospace industry now, and she's a U of A grad. So she's got a quick presentation for us to kind of go through her timeline and some notes about her career and the aerospace industry as it is right now. And then we might get into some more discussion after. So Karina, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Tyler, for the introduction. So my name is Karina. I graduated from the University of Alberta in 2018 from mechanical engineering co-op. And then I really wanted to do aerospace. I loved airplanes. So I went in to do my master's right after my bachelor's in France, in Toulouse, which is the center point for basically aerospace engineering in Europe. That's where Airbus is based out of. And throughout this experience, I also learned that I find rocket engines super cool. And that's what I want to go and build my career in. So that's where I'm currently working right now. I'm in Bavaria at a rocket startup company. So are
we allowed to ask questions, Karina, during the presentation?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I was just wondering what that picture was in the first slide. Are you there? Or what is that behind you as well?
This is our second stage of our rocket, with a 3D printed mock-up of our engine in the back. And here's me holding a little Soyuz rocket in my hands. And this was in our old building where we started off in. So now we've kind of evolved. We now have the whole tank for the first stage, and we have a real engine put together. So yeah,
Okay,
that's
cool.
what the picture is.
Soyuz not to scale. Please continue.
Yes. So yeah, my timeline. I grew up in Canada, but I wasn't born in Canada. I was born in Russia. And when I was 5 years old, we left and we went to Sweden first. So that's where I started going to school. New place, new language. We stayed there for about 2.5 years. And then we up and left again and went to France with my mom for 1 year. There I learned French. And then my parents asked me where I wanted to go next. And I said I knew French. So Canada made sense. I could go into French immersion school. So we came to Canada in 2004. I was 9 years old. But from my history, I was already used to establishing myself in a new country and starting over again. So it wasn't too much of a shock for me. I had to start learning English, went to French immersion school, and we basically stayed in Edmonton and Alberta for most of my life. Then I graduated high school. I decided to go do a bachelor's in mechanical engineering at the University of Alberta. And I remember I came to the open house and I was already interested in airplanes because I would spend my evenings on the Discovery Channel watching Mayday. So it's about aircraft investigations. And I found this so interesting and I loved going on airplanes and flying, which obviously was always a part of my history because we moved country so much. And I remember I went to the open house and I said, "Oh, do you guys have aerospace engineering?" And people were a bit perplexed. They said, "Oh, not really. We have some options when you get later in your degree, but mechanical engineering would be the closest thing." So I said, "Okay, like I'm not totally set on aerospace yet, so yeah, I'll come here. I'll stay near my parents, and I'll see how it goes." Because I knew other universities in Canada had aerospace programs, but you needed higher, like really the highest GPA to get into another province. And if you stayed in your own province, you know, they were more lenient towards the requirements to get into engineering. So I stayed at the U of A. I did this. Did co-op programs. So I worked in oil and gas first, realized I didn't like it. Then I tried to go work in aerospace, but I had nothing on my resume that screamed aerospace. So I managed to get the next best thing. So I was working with trains. So at General Electric, with locomotives for most of my co-op terms. I was doing a lot of student clubs, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And at the end of my degree, I said, man, if I really want to do aerospace, I need to get into this now. So I started really searching for myself, the people that are in the industry in Canada. I had to go outside of Alberta because there was really, really minimal aerospace there. I realized that I have to start doing my own thing and really figuring it out myself because the environment was not around me to really harvest development in aerospace. So I started going to conferences, meeting people, doing more student clubs that are aircraft related and aerospace related. And this somehow got me some job offers in aerospace at the end of my degree, as well as some master's offers. And I had an offer to go to the University of Toronto for my master's, but the masters in America are very research based. So I really have to be focused on one specific topic. And my offer was for computational fluid dynamics. So I would really have to do like CFD on one airfoil for 2 years of my life. And I wasn't sure that I was ready for this. I've always been more of a practical person. I really like getting my hands on things, seeing things, and being more involved in the industry, less than in the research. So I decided that the best offer for me would be to go to the heart of aerospace in Europe, which is in Toulouse in France, which is the base for Airbus. That's kind of like oil and gas in Canada, where everybody seems to be working in it. It was the same deal in Toulouse, but everybody was an aerospace engineer, and they were doing something with satellites, with airplanes, just with the electronics, with the mechanical. You could go to that was the final assembly line of all of the Airbus aircraft. They have the belugas flying there, which actually carry aircraft parts. So everything was just aerospace, and I thought it was really cool. And so I decided to take a chance on that. And I went there, and it was amazing. I learned everything I needed to regarding aircraft that was lacking in my bachelor's. So obviously my bachelor's was really essential. We learned everything mechanical engineering that you needed to. And then the master's kind of enhanced and introduced me to really space flight, orbital mechanics, flight dynamics, structures with aircraft, control of aircraft. And they actually took us in a real airplane. There was about 120 students in my international master's program. They took all of us sequentially, like every week. Some people would go and they would fly in the small aircraft, and they would show you all of the dynamic, flight mechanics that we were learning in class. They would show it to you in flight, which was super cool. I also did some student clubs there that I will talk about in the next slide. And then, like I said, I really got into rockets. I thought, what's the hardest thing you could do in engineering? It's probably building a rocket and rocket engines. So I said, why not try and do this? And through some friends, I found out about startup rocket companies in Germany, in Bavaria, and I decided to apply there. And luckily, I don't know how, but I got in, and I've been working as first an intern at Rocket Factory Augsburg, and now I'm a full-time employee as of this year. And it's just been a whirlwind, and it's been amazing. I've had to do everything from design to analysis to physical testing to procurement to procuring parts. Like, we have to do the whole shebang, and I learn new things at work every day. So I'm loving it. And yeah, that's just been my timeline so far. I've really come from not really knowing what I wanted to do to working in a place that I love coming to work in every day. And I love my colleagues and what I do. And it's just been really cool experience. So I don't know if you have any questions before I go to the student club slide.
For sure. Karina, I think it's really cool to be able to listen to your background and your story to this point and kind of see all the pivots and twists at each individual point. One thing I think you just touched on there at like one of the last portions was like how passionate and motivated you are right now for like what you're doing as a propulsion engineer. And so one of the things that I'd like to ask you is, how did you figure out kind of like your why for why you wanted to go into propulsion, like, rockets? Mm-hmm. Like, for say like other students or other young professionals, how can we, people like indicate or find their why for what they want to do, you think?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point, because I did do student clubs in my bachelor's. Like, I did EcoCar and I did student clubs. Student clubs I was quite passionate about. And then cars, maybe not as much. And it was really what gets you excited and what you want to do when you get home. Like, are you watching car repair videos? If yes, then like these student clubs are relevant and they're cool and they're good for your career, and that's probably like this is what you would like to do. Me, I was more excited about watching like aircraft videos. I was like, oh man, this is really cool. So I guess, yeah, you need to try things out, and you need to recognize when something that you're doing is a chore more than an enjoyment. So I think this is the hard part, is recognizing, when you're doing something, your heart is not leaning towards. So don't stay in it, have the courage to go and try other things and leave it behind if you're not very excited about it. So try not to get put into a place where, you're not excited about work. Like I said, my first co-op, I was in a plan where the co-op was like pretty much right after first year. and you just took what you could get. And it was a job in Fort Mac on site in the middle of winter doing like documentation. So it was really something I really didn't like. And I told myself, you know what? No, I'm not going to go back into this. I'm going to look for other things. So having, I think, the courage to do that and not stopping anywhere. So yeah, I can't develop a rocket right now in Canada, so I've had to go externally. So I'll talk more about aerospace in Canada in the next slides.
It's a really good points you're making. I just wanted to add on a question to that for the why is that, you know, it seems like since you've moved so much throughout your childhood and then now over the course of your career and your education, did you find that was an easy thing to do when you figured out that you wanted to be in the or the aerospace industry and that didn't exist in Alberta? Because I know I experienced the same thing. I wanted to be in the space industry that didn't exist in Alberta, so I had to leave. So I was an expat in the Netherlands for a while, and now I'm in Quebec, which is far away from Alberta. Dave's done the same thing. He's was in Singapore for a period of time. I know for me, when I left home, I was very conflicted about the decision because I'm like, I really enjoy doing this and I think it's my why, but is it my why enough to leave my friends and family and everything behind and go to a strange kind of foreign land? So I always felt kind of conflicted about it, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I took that risk. It turned out really well for me and I wouldn't have it any other way. But at the time, I was really conflicted. Was that an easy decision for you, or were you kind of back and forth on whether you should leave and go pursue aerospace in another country?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, I kind of have two answers to this. One, that it might have been easier for me than it was for you to leave because I am used to leaving. So I kind of, I've done this before. I know what it feels like to start over again. Mind you, it's much later in my adult life now. So it was really hard for me, but because this is what my parents did and it was more normal to me, I think it was a bit easier in that sense. However, in another sense, it was harder because I know all of the difficulties of having to relocate and form, be comfortable in a new environment and learn the new language and the customs and get a new friend group and losing the connections with the other people. I'm kind of just tired of it, having it done this so much. I know the value in just laughing about things that happened 5 years ago with friends, like with the same friend group that you've experienced these things with. So that I think is very valuable, and it's something I look forward to having in the future when I'm a little more settled down. So yeah. I think you can always come back to your home. So why not try it out? So it might not be for everyone. People might have the values to stay in their own environment, and that's totally respectable. That's your own decision, but you can always come back, in my opinion. So why not try it out for a little bit? If you don't like it, I don't think there's any harm in coming back.
Yeah, really good points.
And that way, I think you kind of gain more of a perspective, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do now. Like, I'm still really involved in Canadian aerospace and pushing rocketry and aerospace to develop in Canada. Like, I'm still attached to groups that are doing this, but now I'm gaining experience that I can then bring back home and make it better. So
yeah, you're attaching it to a larger goal, so it makes it easier to have that another evolution of going to a different place and making new friends and stuff like that, because it's for like a higher purpose, kind of, right?
Yeah, and I find anywhere you go, people are different in their cultures and so on, but deep down I think we're all the same. We're all the same human species, so you're gonna find people that you get along with. You're gonna find nice people, and you're gonna have experiences you wouldn't thought would be possible. That's just my opinion from going to different countries. At the end of the day, people are people, and we're not so different.
Yeah, I think Dave and I have said the same thing to each other before. That's the biggest takeaway for me, is that everybody's the same everywhere. You know, everybody just wants their friends, family, and stuff to do, and meaning and everything like that. And you realize that the more places you go. So it's nice to hear that reaffirmed from you.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and even just throwing in my 2 cents here, like, you know, previously living in China, currently living in Singapore, it's the exact same, Karina. Like what you're saying is that I definitely agree. People can always have the opportunity to say, like, go live abroad and try it out. And, you know, you can evaluate. And the best case scenario is that, you know, you decide you want to stay for a longer period of time, and like maybe you bounce around to a different place afterwards. And the worst case scenario, just like you mentioned, is like you give it a shot for half a year, and you can always go home, right? Like you always have kind of like a safe space. And like you're mentioning too, you know, there's great people everywhere you go in the world, and you always find like-minded people in different cultures and in different places. And I definitely agree with you. It adds, you know, value to life experience as well. And then hypothetically, say, you know, in the longer run, if, you know, we go back to Canada afterwards, we can take all these new perspectives and this new knowledge that we gained and then help, like, you know, improve the Canadian society too. So I think it's, you know, all positive things. And with that said, I'd be happy to run to your next slide and start learning a bit more about the student groups that you're part of.
Cool. Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, I've always been somebody that's less focused on just getting grades, and I thought it would be just more valuable and more interesting for me, for the type of person that I am, to do like student groups in addition to my education. So pretty much, I think in first year, I didn't really do much, but from second year, I was already starting to get involved with EcoCar and the Engineering Student Society. So I did both of those for 2 to 3 years. Most of my bachelor's degree, obviously on and off with co-op, you know, it was a bit difficult. And then at the end of my bachelor's, I really said, man, I need to do aerospace. Otherwise I wouldn't get into it. So, I started attending, the CASI, conferences, which were on the east side of Canada. So they kind of alternate. They have aviation themed ones and then space themed ones. So I went to an aviation one, and I met the people working in industry and academia and aerospace in Canada. And I just got so excited. And I'm like, man, this was literally a life-changing experience, this one conference, because I finally got excited about what I wanted to do. And I met the people that could help me get there. So afterwards, one of the professors I met there was the one that I had the offer from for doing a master's at the University of Toronto. So having gone to these conferences, I came back to the U of A, and I'm like, man, people that are excited about aerospace like me, like, they need to learn about this. So then I organized an aerospace day, which they ran at least one more year after that. And then I think COVID happened. So I kind of tried to start a new environment at the U of A that would link the people like me that are interested in the industry to the actual industry, which does exist in Canada, more in the East, but definitely if you put in some effort, you can find it. So with that, I also got involved in a club that does model airplanes, and I learned quite a bit of just design, basic design and theory from that. So that was kind of the student groups that I did at U of A. So at the end, it was really pushing aerospace, but doing new things because they didn't exist. And I know right after I left, Abby Laxon, she also made a rocketry team. So that's awesome on her. And after I graduated,
shout out to Abby. I know Abby.
Yeah.
And sorry, Karina, right. I want to stop you right there because I didn't know if you were going to undersell this or not, but I was there and I remember this. An aero day that you did with Cassie was huge. It sounded like a really modest thing, but I remember this had kind of never been done before. And I kind of remember the effort that you would put into it, organizing all these groups, all these teams, and then ETLC, that big room there was like, the conference room was like booked out. There's booths everywhere. I think you had guest speakers in there. And I just remember at the time thinking because I saw the first one, I was just like, this is wild that, like, you know, because I was like, in the conversations and stuff, I knew you had organized a bunch of this. So it was super impressive, the drive and organization that you put into that while you were a student and still getting your degree and everything. And yeah, like it continued after that, and it was a huge success. So I just wanted to give props to you for that. I remember that thing was an amazing thing.
Yeah, thanks. I really wanted to keep going and keep growing, but you need people to basically push it and work towards it. And yeah, I think it taught me a lot about what I wanted to do and the people that are out there. So one of the speaker of honor, or however you say it, it was a woman who was working as an aerospace engineer in Cold Lake at the military base, which is actually where one of the new astronauts comes from. So he was a fighter pilot there, working there, and he was recruited for the CSA.
I think that's Josh.
So it's a small world. Yeah, exactly. So I did this, and then right after I graduated, I had a summer where I went and I worked at Avmax. So it's a company out of Calgary that does like leasing and selling and remaking Bombardier aircraft. So they were able to recertify a different type of aircraft. So basically, the way it works is they would take an aircraft, and then they would just take a regular Bombardier aircraft that had passengers, and then they would have, for example, the U.S. Army wanting to buy this to train the troops to jump from airplanes. So we would have to completely remake the inside of the airplane, and then you would have to get the type recertified. So we were redesigning and recertifying aircraft. So I was working there for 4 months. They did give me a full-time offer, but I knew I was going to my master's at the end of the summer. So I just did an internship there. And at the same time, I started getting involved with Launch Canada, which I will talk about towards the end of the presentation. And I knew there was a rocketry team at the University of Calgary. So I actually came up there one time and I'm like, hey, I'm super interested in this. We didn't have a rocket team at the U of A when I was there. Can I please help you guys out and see what you're up to? So they said, yeah, sure. Happy to get more help. They were in the building and assembly phase of their hybrid motor that they were then taking to the States, to New Mexico, for a competition called IREC. So it's the Spaceport America Cup, where they have all the US teams, and they also invite Canadian teams to come and launch rockets at a rocket competition. And they have different levels if you bought the engine, or if you build your own engine, if it's solid or hybrid or liquid, etc. So I ended up helping them, staying up all night, to the point where they actually took me to the competition with them. So we went to New Mexico that summer, and it was crazy. You had recruiters and people from all the big companies. You had SpaceX, you had NASA, you had Boeing, you had Virgin Galactic, you had Blue Origin there. And the Canadian teams, they did super well. There's McGill that got the top prize of the whole competition. They were the team of honor out of 120 teams, including the US. And there were about 20 Canadian teams there that year, I think. And all of this Canadian talent basically came to these recruiters of all the sexy, rocket companies in the US. They're like, oh, you're so cool. Would you maybe consider taking a Canadian's resume? Could we please have an internship, etc.? And all the recruiters oh, you guys are so awesome. You got the top prize of the competition. You guys are so talented, but we can't, because they have ITAR regulations, and unless you're a US citizen, you're not allowed to work there, because rockets are considered military, and you just so you can't work there. So it was a huge disappointment. I think, to go there and realize that we have no future in North America as somebody that likes building rockets to build rockets. It was kind of an eye-opening experience, and also to see how many actual talented people we have in Canada for this kind of job. So that's what motivated me to then work with Launch Canada, that I'll talk about after. So yeah, then I started my master's that fall in 2018. And there I really focused on my studies, but I still did teams on the side. So now that I realized I like building rocket engines, I said, okay, I'm going to go build a rocket engine for fun on the side. So we developed another hybrid motor. So it means a liquid oxidizer that you put into a chamber that also has solid grain fuel in it, that we were printing on a 3D printer in funky shapes that then like contributes to your combustion reaction. So yeah, we were 3D printing parts of the engine. So that was a cool project. And at the same time, because this is an aerospace school, you could also start doing your private pilot license, which I worked really hard to get into, and I started doing my flight hours there. So those were my two like extracurriculars on the side while I was doing my master's.
I'll just jump in and say, I know you're training to be an astronaut. You can speak Russian. You have your master's degree. You're getting your pilot's license. It's all adding up now.
No.
Yeah.
But honestly, the pilot license is more of a motivation just to be an overall better aerospace engineer, because if I don't do rockets, I really want to work on airplanes. That's what my passion started in, really building greener, like airplanes that pollute less. And I think it really motivates me because it touches more people than, for example, rockets, because a lot more people fly on aircraft. So if I ever, when I do go back into aircraft, I want to have that perspective of flying the aircraft. It's like trying to build a car without knowing how to drive a car. You know, you just don't have the same perception, I think. So that was mostly the motivation. Also, I can't ever admit to wanting to be an astronaut, because then I would just commit myself too much and then probably be disappointed. But
yeah, you can't tell that to yourself, because then you would chase it, right? And that would consume your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Too difficult.
I maybe have a couple of questions regarding just student clubs. Say from the perspective of, like students and as well young professionals, what were, say, some of the main social skills that you say you developed through like interactions with other students within all these clubs that you're part of over, say, your bachelor's and your master's?
So I think, working together in a team, the fact that you're all working towards a bigger goal, and, you know, you can't get there alone, and everybody needs to do their part. I think that was a really big thing that you need to learn in engineering school. And we do anyways, because there's no way we can complete all of our homework by ourselves unless we're super smart. So yeah, working together in a team. And then, for example, the Engineering Student Society had taught me to kind of lobby for what I believe in, because we're kind of representing the broader student body. And one of those years I was the vice president of external. So it was really going to conferences and talking to other groups and saying, oh, this is what we're lacking at the university, etc. So one of the things that ended up changing on a whole Canadian Engineering Student Society scale, which I was one of the people that started the discussion on this, was allowing students to have other languages counted as extracurricular activity. So this took a few years to implement, but it's a discussion that we started when I was at the Canadian Engineering Student Society conference. So it was lobbying for things that you kind of believe in. And then, in EcoCart, it was really nice, because that's when you started to get the hands-on experience with with some of the components. And you kind of, that's less of a communication thing. So, I think it's working together in a team, and then, lobbying for things that you believe in. I could say that.
Maybe a follow-up question I have to that too is, say, were there any examples of, say, like times where you thought within a student group that things should be done like one way, and then say like other people were trying to push things in a different way, and like how do you kind of balance these interactions of dynamics?
I think this happens all of the time. Everybody has their own ideas. I think this is why there needs to be some kind of hierarchical structure to a group, in a sense, for like somebody to kind of listen to all of the team members' ideas, and then kind of almost brainstorm and mold all these ideas together into what the common goal is of the team. I don't know if that kind of answers the question. You want to repeat it again?
No, I think it does. Tyler, sorry, did you have something to add in?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, not on that specific question, but just related to student clubs in general. Students are, when you're doing your undergrad degree, you're so busy, right? Like you're doing 6, 7 courses a semester sometime. And a lot of these student clubs look really attractive to a student that wants to get involved in something like that. But it's just like, sometimes you don't have the time, and it's like, I got all this homework due. How am I going to spend, where's my free time to spend on this? So was it difficult for you to like strike a balance between all, because you've done a lot. This is a lot of activities. More like I did one extra activity. You're doing a lot here. How did you make that justification? And do you feel like, not that it hurt your grades, but like, do you think that like, were you ever tempted to spend more time on your academic work rather than the club's work, but you just kept coming back to it somehow?
Mm-hmm. I think it did hurt my grades, especially at the start. But I think it was a worthwhile sacrifice for me, because they said, I'm not going to be the top student, but I think the things I will learn outside of just the raw engineering are going to be more beneficial than the 0.1, 0.2 addition to my GPA that I would have. So I think, it's the things that you learn from student clubs that you wouldn't learn otherwise. So it's the interaction of the team for working towards an actual project. And like EcoCar, it's really the physical aspect of working on something. And you need to acknowledge, how long it takes you to drill a hole through a, 2mm steel plate, for example, So it gives you the perspective that you wouldn't get in the classroom. And for me, it was worth it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a worthwhile trade-off.
And then that's kind of how you discover also what you kind of like and what you don't like doing. EcoCar was great, but I wasn't super, excited about it. Whereas when I got to the rocket teams, I could stay up all night and, work on this rocket project. And that's what I knew when I knew it's like, oh, this is what I like, because they don't teach rocket science directly in classrooms. Actually, I think there's only probably like 1 or 2 schools in the world where you actually learn about rockets exclusively.
Yeah, definitely not at the undergrad level, right? But I like the point you were making that, you got to try. You made that point earlier too, that you got to try a bunch of different things. So it looks like that's exactly what you did until you landed on the one that you knew you wanted to make a career out of. Right on. Well, please continue, Karina.
So this is kind of the end of the student club educational part. So if you have any more questions kind of around that, you could do them now.
I think, okay, I don't have any directly related to the student clubs, but maybe my question is going to be more related to this is like, say like kind of the path that you've shown right now is quite linear. And I think like a lot of times when we're sort of like going over our past like 5 years, for example, it seems like a very like linear growth mechanism. I'm wondering, do you have any examples of kind of like adversities you face, Karina, along your way to say, even it could be in your bachelor's, it could be during your co-ops, it could have been, choosing between the master's programs you wanted to do, and then say like how you overcame those adversities. Because I know even for myself, like just thinking about where I am right now, it seems like pretty logical. But then when I kind of think back over like the last 2 or 3 years and like bouncing between China and Singapore and learning machine learning and coding and AI and all these things, I'm like, okay, it actually really wasn't all that linear.
Yeah, for sure. There was a lot of things to overcome. Just being younger and before my engineering degree, just completely moving into a new country and starting in a new environment with a new language. That was kind of tough. Not fitting in. And yeah, it was especially the language part. That was really hard, but I didn't really have a choice, so just forced myself through it. And I had a really tough mom, so I need to give her props for that. And then in engineering, it was also really rough. All of the late nights, all of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into your GPA, and then you just fail one of your quizzes or an exam, and you're like, oh no, it's the end of the world. So maybe having just having like the end goal in mind that, I can be an engineer at the end of this. It helped me kind of overcome this. Yeah, I think you just got to keep pushing through, and you just got to keep working hard. You need to just pick a lane to go into. When you're faced with a choice, you just need to take one of the directions and go with it. Just go with your gut, and just work hard in whatever you choose to do. So one of the biggest life decisions was where to do my master's, which I have another point to make on this, which is really interesting. So I was not a super good student by any means. Towards the end of my degree, I really made a push to do better, and then in my final year, I had an acceptable GPA, like really on the lower end of what they tell you needs to what you need to have to go into a master's. So don't let the fact that you have, not a 4.0 GPA prevent you from applying to master's, because that's what I did. I think I had like a 3.2 or something at the end of my third year when I was actually applying to the master's programs. And in Canada, the thing is they tell you to have a 3.7 or higher, because otherwise you won't have access to these grants that professors usually use through the government websites to get funding for your program. But I was somehow accepted because I knew the professor. He knew how much passion I had towards this. I was doing all these extracurriculars. So your passion will come through, and it will overcome, your lack of numerical perfection, if you will, in your GPA. And it so happened that this professor has other funding from other places, so he wasn't so concerned about this grant. So don't be dissuaded by the fact that you're not perfect on the paper. Stop you from your goals. So yeah, one of the choices I had was to go to a master's at the U of T with this professor, and the other one was to go to France. And actually, I think I really dragged this out, I think, for 2 months, making this decision. At the end of the day, I was flipping a coin, and I said, okay, if it's heads, I go here. If it's tails, I go here. And then it actually landed on the U of T. And then in my gut, I was like, oh, this is not what I wanted. And that's when I knew. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to France, because what the coin was telling me to do, I was not happy with. So I just decided to go there, and yeah, just try not to look back and think on what could have been. Just keep going towards where you want to go, and the further you go, maybe you have a better idea of where you want to be.
Yeah, I feel like you kind of beautifully wrap that all up. And I also enjoy the portion of the coin flip. I feel like sometimes it's just like you do that, but even if it goes against the way that you wanted it to, you're like, oh, actually, I really wanted the other one instead. And so I'm happy you followed your passion with that. Oh, I've done that so many times. I have this one. Actually, I don't have my wallet by me, but basically, before I moved to China for the first time, Karina, my friend Oliver, like his Chinese name's like Yu It's Hao. He gave me this like 10 yuan like Gautier, which is like high speed train coin, and I've kept it in my wallet ever since. So it's been in my wallet for like 2.5 years. But anytime I need to make a decision that's like not extremely consequential, just like say like deciding between options or like a couple choices, like I've brought it out before, and I literally just flip it and I'm like, okay, if it lands on the Gautier, like I'm going to do this, and if it goes on the other, I'm going to do that. And I don't know, sometimes I'm like pretty much like a man. I'm like, all right, I'm going to choose this. I'm a man of my word. I'm like, if I say I'm going to let the coin choose for me, I'm going to let the coin choose for me. But I don't know. I respect you that like say like a very consequential decision, like, you know, maybe moving halfway across the world or like a third of the way across the world, like just leave it up to a coin flip and see how it goes. Like, I think it's a fun way to live life. Like,
maybe I knew that that's what I wanted, but I was also kind of scared, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess all of us have perspective on that now. Cause I mean, Tyler, you chose to like basically move abroad right after school. For me, it took a little bit longer. I did a master's still in Edmonton. And then like, you know, I chose that as a choice later, but it's definitely not an easy decision by any means. Cause one of the things you touched on, Karina, earlier was like, you know, every place that you have to go, you kind of, I guess for me, the way I look at it is like, you kind of need to like reinvent yourself a little bit. Like whether it's just like finding new friend group, maybe you pick up like, you know, new interests, or like me, for example, it's like I love playing ice hockey, but like I can't find many ice hockey rinks in Singapore. So it's like I need to find like a new hobby and whatnot. Actually, a question I'll direct to you here would be like, do you feel like basically now, because you've had the opportunity to like live and participate in so many different cultures, like, do you feel for you that it continues to like add more dynamic to like your life experience, and like it helps kind of make your relationships or your friendships like more fulfilling, almost like say between like, it could be like professional colleagues, or it could just be like, you know, personal friendships too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like on both levels. The company where I work in now, it's very multicultural. We have a few people that were at Rocket Lab before. In New Zealand, like we have people from a lot of different European countries. We have people from all over the world. So I think it contributes because they themselves have their own experiences and their own like formations and educations in their respective parts of the world. So then when we're collectively working on this rocket project together, there's a lot of different things that, you know, people can contribute that you would not have if you did not go and experience these things on other parts of the world. Yeah, and my personal relationships also, just my own cultural development has really changed. I got to go and visit, you know, we had an international masters. It was really students from everywhere, you know, Thailand, Colombia, Georgia, Italy, like Germany, everywhere. And I got to go and visit them in their own countries, and they would like introduce me to, you know, the food they eat, and, you know, when they eat, at what time they have dinner, you know, and things, the environment around them. And it was just really eye-opening. So one of the funny examples I have is like, we have a Swiss chalet in Canada, and they make chicken there. And I have really good friends that are in Switzerland, so I spend a lot of time there. They actually have a Swiss chalet, you know, in the mountains, and it is chalet and it is Swiss. And the food that they eat in Switzerland is fondue, which is actually made just of 2 shredded cheeses, usually blended together, also mixed in with wine, and they only dip bread in there. So I have no idea how the name Swiss Chalet in Canada came to be for this chicken place, because chicken has nothing to do with Switzerland. They're all about cheese and chocolate. Yeah. So it kind of, you gain all these different perspectives from other cultures, which is just interesting to you as a human being to experience as well.
Beautifully put. I just want to add a quick, another funny one on there when we're talking about Swiss Chalet and the influence from Switzerland. There's a Canadian pizza in Singapore, and it's like probably one of the most famous pizza chains in Singapore. I'm like what is specifically famous about Canadian pizza? Like, we just totally took it from a different country and brought it to Canada.
Do they have poutine on the pizza? Please
they don't have a poutine pizza either. They don't have a poutine pizza either. I've actually considered this. I was like, because I started making poutine from scratch in Singapore. I was like, I could probably start a poutine restaurant here. Like, I'll just make, I don't know. I won't give up on the machine learning dream. Like, I'll still do AI, but maybe like a side hustle can be like, I'll open up a poutine restaurant here in a few years. So, but I'll keep you posted if there's poutine there or not.
Excellent. I will come there just for the poutine.
We'll make it like, I don't know, American poutine or something like that. Like, just kind of like continue down this trend. Karina, do you want to move to your next slide?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into Rocket Tech.
Let's go to Rocket Tech.
So props to Pinterest for this photo. So why did I want to go work in rockets? I thought it was really challenging and super cool. And Elon Musk is also making it sound cool to the broader public. So I think that's really cool on his part. I just want to talk about rockets and kind of how they work, because it's not something that gets taught very much in university. So this is not super according to scale, this image, so the payload would actually be less percentage of the rocket, and most of it is just your propellants, so that's like 90% of your rocket. You have either solid rocket boosters, so this is when you just burn solid fuel, so that's the one diagram that's on the right. Then you also could have hybrid rockets, where you have a liquid oxidizer and then a solid fuel that you're burning. But most orbital launchers, they use biliquid propellants. And a rocket can really have engineers from all corners of engineering working on this. So you have the structural part. It's really important because you really want to minimize the mass. Every kilogram counts on a rocket. You have extremely complex electronics that need to be very reliable, and avionics. You need to have guidance, navigation, and control, which is super challenging because the rocket needs to know where it is at all times in three-dimensional space, where it's going, and it needs to be able to guide itself to the actual orbital insertion point of the payload. You have thermodynamics, all of your basic principles. You have your fluid dynamics. You have combustion chemistry. You have innovating manufacturing. So we do 3D printing at our company, and this is kind of the new front of engineering for rocket engines that hasn't been around for the past 50 years since the last space race. So now you can think of more innovative ways that you can kind of manipulate additive manufacturing to rocket engine development. So this is a really interesting thing as well. Launch site logistics. Where are you launching? How do you build the infrastructure around this launch vehicle? So talking to different countries and the regulatory framework around orbital rocket launches. So the US has been really prominent in this. Europe has had the one launcher they had in the past, which they were launched from French Guiana. And then obviously the Soviet Union and Russia, they're also capable launch countries. Now Asia's getting into it, and Europe as well. And really what we've seen in this new space race is the privatization of space, and the fact that SpaceX has shown NASA that we can do it faster and cheaper than these old government agencies. So we're really seeing this new space race, and it's super exciting, not only on the technical level, but also on the regulatory framework, like I was saying, and the launch site logistics and all of this. and obviously the commerce industry for the actual payloads that you want to get into space. So if you want to challenge yourself in an engineering field, just know that, aerospace and, rocket development, for example, it's an interesting field that, for example, at the U of A, I didn't really know, how a rocket works, and the fact that you got to really have all these different facets of engineering in both rockets and airplanes. So I think you guys have, like Tyler, you have some experience with this too. Like anybody can work in aerospace. You don't need to be like a mechanical airplane freak to work on this. Like now they're testing airplanes in Airbus that are like they're autonomous, so they do their own takeoff and landing. Like it has really the forefront of all engineering fields.
Yeah, would definitely agree. And I think, like, yeah, it's easy. I won't say easy, but like you can definitely get into these fields with just a bit of context. Like, you need your fundamentals from all of these forefronts of engineering, like Karina is talking about. And then if you just understand the context of the environment in which these engineering fundamentals are operating, then you can get a job in these industries. And that's why I really like them, is because it pulls everything together. You need every single discipline to make this work. And yeah, the revolution that's happening in the rocketry industry right now is awesome, because that was like the biggest barrier to launch access. So it's hard to get things into space, and now it's getting more affordable because of, companies like the one Karina works at. So I think it's awesome. And yeah, like rockets are just so hard too. I'm more on the space side, and I'll always appreciate the work that you guys put on the rocket side to get the payloads into space, because it's just incredible.
I think the satellite part is also really hard, because then you need to keep them in operation, and then just the environment that they're in is not very friendly. So
we mainly turn things off and turn them back on again. You have to try to not blow something up.
Psycho. We also try to not blow something up. Look at this.
True. Yeah, and you know what? Just it's interesting how the rockets are evolving. I was looking the other day, and I just realized how big the Saturn V was that took the Apollo missions to space. It was just huge, right? And so the new SpaceX rockets are like almost kind of the same size. But yeah, and so just everything that industry is going through right now is really amazing to watch. So I'd be really interested in keeping up with all the work you're doing and the efforts that you're making back in Canada as well, to kind of create a bit more of a push here and a revolution here, because I think it's something that's really needed. It's really important, and you're playing a big role in it.
Yeah, exactly. What Starship with SpaceX is doing is just absolutely bonkers. So the next test flight that they're going to have, they're going orbital. So it's really cool. They put up, a tweet recently where they stacked the Starship on top of like the big booster. And then we also have been testing our tank, our first stage tank. So we also have, the metallic structure on the bottom. And then we both have, this black structure on the very top. So we actually put our picture next to the SpaceX picture, and it kind of looks like the same. Obviously the scales are off because our rocket is much smaller, but it looks kind of like the same thing, and it's really cool. But you look at this big rocket and you're like, oh, it's so complicated. Most of that is just a tank for your propellants, which I think is interesting. Yeah, so I just have one more slide about rocket tech.
Go for it.
So it's more about the engine. So you just kind of see a nozzle at the end of a rocket usually, and you're like, oh, this is how you make the thrust, right? So when I got into rocket development, especially for orbital vehicles, so when you do student rocketry, normally you have, even if you're doing bi-liquid rockets, you have just a pressure-fed system. So you have a pressurized gas that kind of increases the pressure of your propellants, and then you ignite this whole mixture in your chamber, and then you have your throat and your nozzle generating your thrust. But when you go orbital, you really need a lot more power. So now what you have is pumps to increase the pressure of the propellants to to its most, efficient state. And you need to drive these pumps with something. Most rocket engines are driven with a turbine. So what Rocket Lab did is they actually replaced this turbine with an electrical motor. So that was an innovative part that they did. And they've done like 14 launches by now of their rockets. So they're the first like small satellite private startup company that has been doing really well in the industry. They decided to modernize that a little bit. But really, so the pump and the turbine together is kind of called a turbo pump assembly. And this is the heart of your engine. And then you have, the injector elements, and you have these propellants at a defined mixture ratio going into your combustion chamber. And you want to then operate this combustion reaction pretty much stoichiometric, because then you get the most power out of it, and then get it out of your nozzle. And the challenge with getting the most amount of power is that the heat is super high. You're dealing with temperatures of about 3,500 Kelvin average for the reaction for our propellants. So we use liquid oxygen, and then rocket grade kerosene as our propellants. So you have this super high combustion reaction in your combustion chamber, and you need to somehow cool the metals around it, because if not, everything is going to melt. So what you do is you actually pump one of the propellants around in the walls of your combustion chamber before they get injected into your combustion chamber. And you drive these pumps, like I said, with a turbine, which runs itself on another combustion reaction. So this is kind of what I do at my work. When I first started being an intern, this was my main project. It was trying to do a model for the whole coupled system of the engine, so that I could tell our guys that are testing the engine up in Sweden that how to configure it to operate it at different levels. So maybe we don't want to go full power right away. Maybe we want to go a little bit less power. What kind of configuration do we need for that? How does the whole coupled system react? And you need more than an Excel sheet, and even more than Simulink, to be able to do these kind of computations. So this is basically what a rocket engine is. I think it's super fun. It's a super coupled system. And why I think people say rocket science is hard is because you have so many variables that there's no way you can consider all the ways it can go wrong and all the ways you can mess up, that you just kind of need to, it's just trial and error. And at my company, we just had a couple of weeks ago, a successful 8-second steady hot fire. So everything managed to work, this whole coupled thing. We figured it out more or less, but it took a lot of tries to get there. But this is kind of how the private rocket startup companies are doing it. They're taking after SpaceX, and they're doing less of the theoretical design, which would take years and years. And they're kind of just more going on feel and trying things out at a test site. So you kind of test and iterate. So you test something, you figure out that it goes wrong because there was no way you could account for it before. And then, you iterate. And this is why I love my job, and it's so fun, is because we learn new things every day. And it's just, it's a challenge for me of what I'm doing. Yeah, so that's kind of what my job is, and where we're at the company.
Tyler, okay, I was gonna see if you want to talk about this, because I feel like you probably understand this domain even better than I do.
I can't put it any better than that. Karina covered everything. She went really in depth there, and it's a good summary of how rockets work. And I like her point about how it's a lot of iteration now, not purely theoretical. It's taking that kind of startup mentality and applying it to a field like rocketry, which is just amazing. The companies have found a way to do that. It's super innovative. So, I appreciate that point that she made too.
Yeah. And I think even on my end, Karina, like one thing, like obviously I can tell how passionate you are about your job, and just like the work you're doing, it like kind of comes through with like your voice and how you're talking about it. I think the one thing that I can even relate to for, say, like kind of finding passions or why, if you realize that something like you really enjoy doing every day and you love the aspect that you get to like learn and challenge yourself and do something new every day, like every day is a little bit different in some aspect. I feel like that is like the perfect career because you're going to just try different things between, say, like each week, each month, and then over time you kind of figure out, okay, what are the little nuggets that I liked from this month or like this year, and what's the stuff I didn't enjoy so much. And because you're always learning and trying so many new different things, you pick up all these skills along the way, and then you probably have like a really fruitful career over who knows, like the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, just because of like this mentality of like always wanting to learn and grow and challenge yourself. So it's really apparent, and I think like the people who listen to it afterwards will also be like inspired because of that too.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I didn't know exactly that this is what I wanted to do, but I love the challenge of it. Yeah, and I love what I'm doing. And I kind of just wanted to uncover a little bit for the people listening what rocket science is and like what an engine does, so people kind of know a little bit more about this field. So I kind of learned. Yeah, I've learned to do everything. I've had to work on test rigs a lot as well, so I've had to learn what all the different fittings are, and different valves and how to like control a whole, pressurized testing system, and so on. So just working in a startup environment in this kind of a field has been really fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. And thank you for the breakdown on rockets. That's good free learning for anybody that listens. Cause like you say, they don't teach that often. It was a long time before I figured out how a rocket worked. And I think people are going to find it really interesting.
Cool. Yeah. And I think how most people end up working in this field, from like the people that I work with now, is just they were nerdy about it and they went on the internet and they found Scott Manley videos and some literature like the good old Sutton textbook, and you just kind of learn it yourself. This is for rockets anyway. So you realize you get excited about something and then you go and you try and enrich your knowledge to the best of your abilities on your own, and then if you reach out to professionals in the field, then they'll be able to tell that you're passionate about it, and then you can back up with all these things you learned by yourself. So don't let because of the internet and our access to all this information now, there are limited barriers for you to keep from doing what you want to be doing. So you have all this information at your fingertips. Just take the effort to learn what you need to learn. Because we had all these students come to this big rocket launching event at the United States, there was a group of students and professionals in Canada that decided to bring up the topic of why don't we have a Canadian competition, because we have over 20 Canadian university rocket teams. So we started this group about 2.5 years ago, to have a Canadian rocket competition. So there's over 1,000 students in Canada that are doing rocketry, and they're, like I said, they're doing it on the level where they're beating the US teams at these competitions. So there's clearly talent and a need to nurture these teams locally, so we can kind of shed more light for the community in Canada and the industry that we have this talent and we can develop this technology. So obviously this is really bad timing with COVID inhibiting us actually having a first competition thus far. I'm not sure for this year. I think we'll be able to launch some rockets, but not an official competition. So mostly next year will be like the first year for these teams. So the main challenge we've been having is the fact that the Canadian Transport Canada law does not allow any experimental rocket engines to be fired. So basically you can only launch rockets that you buy the motor from a known company already. So this is super inhibiting to all of the teams that are already way past this point, and they have enough knowledge now to develop their own engines. And one of the teams that have really stood out in the last month is Space Concordia. So they were part of a competition that was originally in the US to build the first rocket that would hit space. So the Kármán line at about 100 kilometers. And it's a bi-liquid engine. So because they were pushing with this project and this campaign, they've actually demonstrated really recently the largest student-built rocket engine that's ever been test-fired in the world. So the most powerful one was in Canada. So yeah, myself and a group of passionate people are working towards not only having this competition and making an environment for these students to launch rockets, but we're also working with Transport Canada to actually change law and develop law to enable self-developed rocket engines to be launched on Canadian soil. So there is a Canada called Maritime Launch Services out of Eastern Canada who want to make who are building a spaceport to launch Ukrainian rockets from Canadian soil. So they even don't have the framework worked out with Transport Canada about how they will legally manage rocket launches. So we're really working on a national level with the military and with the government to enable this industry to thrive in Canada, which is really important. It's a very slow process, but it takes, people like me, and there's some people also in Rocket Lab who are Canadians that are passionate about this and that have some experience to bring into rocket development. So this is what's happening in Canada. I think it's really exciting and very important to shed a light on. And it's really sad talking to student teams that are here in Europe, because they've managed to make a European competition where they launch out of Portugal. And like my Swiss friends with their team, they've been also able to launch their homemade, student-made rocket engines from Switzerland, being such a small country with such a dense population. And they talk to me and they're like, man, Canada is so big. The population density is so small. You have so much space. Why can't you launch rockets? And I said, man, I don't know. The regulations aren't there for it. We're working to change it. So it's very embarrassing on a national level that we don't have this framework developed yet. But we're definitely seeing steps in the government and the military that they're working with us to change this. So I hope Canadian aerospace is going to take off soon. No pun intended.
Karina, it's good that you're taking the initiative to try to push this forward, because I agree with you. I think what do they say? It's just let's try to minimize the competition, or sorry, not minimize the competition, minimize the barriers to enter competition, or minimize the barriers to entry, right? And so even by just having this set up in Canada in this way, it gives a huge advantage to say these American teams that the universities were participating in the competitions beforehand, because okay, so say we have all these brilliant students with fantastic technologies and they're working so hard in Canada, but then they can't go to the US and get jobs with some of the top companies there. So it's okay, let's bring it back on our home soil. But then say on our home soil, then it's the red tape is essentially exactly, but we can't actually do this. So I think it's great that you're trying to push this initiative forward right now to essentially basically try to re-regulate these laws, because it's just going to help the students learn and grow, right? And no matter what they end up doing, it's just going to help Canada's basically space industry grow in the longer run too, because you have all these brilliant people who are going to have more opportunities within the country. So they're going to stay in the country to build these technologies rather than, basically being forced to go outside because of maybe say these opportunities that aren't there because of the regulations.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I had to do. I had to go out of the country to get this experience. But the people that are doing these for student groups in Canada, you know, they're not just rocket enthusiasts. They just want to push themselves in their engineering field. And this comes back to my point that rockets are a field that touches everything. So actually these student rocket teams, they also need to build a payload project. And there's some really cool experiments, like trying to, you know, pick up dark matter in the air while they're flying this rocket. So, I mean, it's important to thrive this student development, even if you don't want them to work in aerospace, you know? So there's so much innovation that goes into these projects. It's really cool.
I agree with you. I think it's important for any student that's in university and wants to be innovative and try new things and kind of push the barriers of engineering in a significant way and put all this extra effort into it. It has to be made as easy for them to do that as possible, because the task at hand is already incredibly hard. So all those other things need to be easy, like regulations, like what you can and can't do and everything like that. So props to your effort. I know everybody that you're working with, if it's gone like the rest of your career has gone in school and everything, you're going to get it done eventually. You just have to keep working at it. You've had some disadvantages with COVID and, you know, being out of the country and everything like that. But I'd be excited to see where it goes in the future, because I have a feeling this is going to come full circle at some point.
Yeah. It's already making its way there. So I'm really happy. It's baby steps, but it's baby steps in the right direction. Yeah. And just to conclude, I think the statement from this is figure out what you want to do and don't stop at anything to try and get it, you know, and just be happy along the way. Just work your butt off and do your best, and then doors will open for you.
I love it. Good advice.
Yeah.
Actually, even just talking about like the baby steps too, there's this like a phrase that I learned this week. It's like "suyu," which is basically like this traditional Chinese. It's like "不怕慢就怕jian." It's like basically don't be afraid of moving slow, be afraid of stopping. So yeah, I would say this approach with Launch Canada and your career so far has been very successful, and I hope, you know, there's just more great things to come from you, like here on out.
Thank you.
Yeah, would definitely agree. Well said. Looking forward to seeing what you do in the future, Karina. All right, so that was Karina. Hope everybody enjoyed that. It was a great interview, and thanks to her for giving us the overview of rocketry at the end. That was awesome. So Dave, first thoughts. What did you think of that one?
Yeah, I really enjoyed having Karina on. Obviously, Tyler, you and I knew her previously from her time at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Definitely like super ambitious, always trying to kind of like push the status quo and like work towards, building up for the future. So I had kind of a couple of things that I was thinking about while we were talking to her, and also like when I listened back afterwards and listened to the episode. One thing that I found like quite interesting and unique with Karina is she mentioned how she's always kind of used to like establishing herself in like a new place, which I guess like even Tyler, you and I have a little bit of experience on too, because I know you've already basically moved 2 times from like hometown, Netherlands, Montreal, similar to me, China, Singapore. And so I felt like she had a good perspective on this too, because I think her attitude was really great in the fact that she's saying, you know, people across the globe actually are like very similar to one another in the senses of that, you know, we might have some type of differences, but, you know, we're all really the same in the whole scheme of things. So I thought that was quite interesting with Karina. And then, any thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that point too. It was absolutely true, as you and me know, just from us being in all these different regions and different places, that, you know, it's kind of a core truth is that everybody is nearly the same everywhere. It's just that their environments and their culture change. But yeah, and a thing that I noticed with that is that she's moved so many times. She's moved more times than us and more time than the regular person does. Is that she was also mentioning that now it feels like she's getting diminishing returns out of it. You know, she's moved to another place and she wasn't too excited about getting established in a new place and making new friends. She kind of wants her old friends again and stuff like that. So that was a very different take than we've heard before of somebody that moves to a new place and has this. I'm sure like the first time, I think it just goes as like kind of an overview to say that the first time you do a new experience, you get a lot out of it. And as you keep doing that same thing over and over, you might realize less and less benefits every time. So, you know, she's chasing her why and her goal to go to a new place, but it might not be as impactful. Like I know if I went and I was an expat again somewhere in a different country, I don't know if I would have the same, it would have the same impact as the first time I moved away. And so I think that like might be an important takeaway, is that, you know, it's good to have new experiences, but a new type of experience at the same time. So for instance, like right now, I'm learning a new language. It's the first time I've learned a new language, and that's having a huge impact on me. And so that's a completely different thing. But if I learn 5 or 6 languages, I might be getting diminishing returns on that eventually. So you should evaluate like what type of experience are you getting, and are you doing the same thing over and over again in a new way, or are you doing something completely new? Because I kind of sympathized with her with that. You know, she keeps getting uprooted, and it's hard for her to make those long-term investments in relationships. So, you know, it was definitely a different take than we've heard on that before, but it also helped her really make the decision that she was just going to go chase her dream at the same time. So also especially like very useful at the exact same time.
Completely. And I think one thing too is like, well, from the last point that you mentioned, just like going and chasing your dreams. One other thing that I noted down that Karina was talking about is that you can always, like, especially for us as Canadians, it's like you can always come back home, even if it's like a difficult transition to like where you went to or like what you're doing. And like, I think, Tyler, that would be like a good, you know, a kind of thing to mention as well for like yourself and myself, right? Is that like, say if you decide to, and like, it doesn't even have to be like you go super far away. It could just be like, you're from Edmonton, you want to go move to Red Deer for a job, or like you're from Calgary and you want to go to Vancouver for a job. You know, if you go there and like, do your best and give it your all, and you can kind of find like what excites you and what interests you. You know, the worst case scenario is like you always can go back home. You have your friends back home. Like they still love you and care for you. Your family too, if your family's from that same place as well. And I think like it does, like through these experiences, like maybe it doesn't seem perfectly apparent at the time what is maybe we're getting out of it. But I know like once you actually can go like from a period afterwards and then kind of like self-reflect from that period of time behind, like you can definitely see the growth as the person, or like for a person, just because of all these new experiences and all these different things that you were trying during that period of time. And so like, I think like, you know, I can definitely empathize with Karina's kind of mention of that, like it's hard to be uprooted frequently. But I'd say like on the same side too, is that like there are realizable benefits to like each time. And it's like, even if we do the uprooting, then it's just kind of like, we do have like a little bit of onus on us to basically say like, maintain your networks, maintain your relationships in different places, like these type of things. But like, if it's done right, like you can definitely have a really enjoyable life experience from like, you know, these travels and these adventures you go on. And especially like, well, all of us are still relatively quite young too.
Yeah, absolutely would agree. And then just to add on to that point about like, you know, you have that safety net and that you can always come back home, I would also say that you have to think about that not just in terms of like location, but just in things you try to, right? So like if you're an engineer and you want to try something in management, you can go try managing a project. If it doesn't work out, you can come back to being an engineer and try that again later, and maybe you didn't like it and stuff like that. So, you know, you always have your baseline, and it's really good to try to deviate from it and just know that you can come back to it. So, I mean, I think that's a really good point that she made there, is that, you know, you can take comfort in the fact that you can always come back home, figuratively or literally.
Totally. And actually kind of what you're just mentioning too, I'll move into a different part now, is that Karina was always mentioning she's taking initiatives to basically go and learn new things, but also like basically try and figure out what excites her. So a couple of things that I mentioned or wrote down here that we talked about in the interview was, one, Space Day that she ran, I believe, with some other people at the University of Alberta when she was a bachelor's student there. And then 2 was the rocket competition. So I believe when she had an internship or not an internship, maybe it was a full-time job in Calgary, I want to say that was 2018. She then was basically joined like this University of Calgary Rocket Club. And then she also got to go to the US to participate in the competition. So like, I felt like kind of like what you were saying, Tyler, is just like on these initiative side, Karina's like so ambitious and always like trying these different things. It's just really cool and like inspiring to say, like people like yourself and myself too, that are kind of sitting here on the outside. And like, you know, we're working on our own side projects too. Like, you know, we have the podcast and like, we're always like thinking and working on some other ideas in our mind too. But I think like, it's so inspiring to kind of just hear Karina's like ideas and like looking at how she like actuates her plans.
No, definitely. That part that she spoke about, that kind of fired me up a little bit, that she like, you know, had so much initiative that she was going to go do that. And the quote that I love from that is that she said she had to start figuring it out on her own because the environment wasn't around her. So the environment around her wasn't going to facilitate her getting into the aerospace industry because it didn't exist in Alberta. So she just started creating it on her own, which is a mammoth, impossible task when you're getting your undergrad. It's hard enough just to do that. So the fact that she had the drive enough to kind of build that around her, leave and pursue it, and then is still trying to build that environment back in Canada here is just incredible. So that's, the amount of drive that you have to not stop short of your goals, even if, no clear path to those goals exists around you. She just started creating it. So, and I think the other point I want to touch on with that is that, she made a big point about have the courage to try something else if you realize you're not enjoying what you're doing. You have to realize if you're enjoying something or if it's a chore, right? And so she kind of knew after she did that term in Fort Mac that she didn't want to go back. So then she had more drive to go pursue something else. And I think that's a really good point because, you can get comfortable in a situation. It might not be a situation that, you might not sit there at your job or what you're learning in school and stuff like that and be like, I absolutely hate this. You might be like, yeah, this is okay. But if it's not really what you want to be doing, then the point you made is really good. Have the courage to try and do something else, right? Because it can be easy to stay in that situation, but you can see that she's not like that, and it's paid huge dividends for her because of all the things she's doing now. So I thought that was another really good point that she made.
Yep. Completely in agreement. And that kind of brings me right back to another note that I was taking here. Is she mentioned that basically it was difficult to balance her time between her schoolworks and her clubs, but she still said it it was super worthwhile, all the time that she put into the clubs, because she essentially mentioned that it helped her discover what she liked doing and also what she didn't like doing. And then as well too, a quote that I took out of that was your passion, say, because for her, she was always very initiative oriented, working on these student clubs. So she basically mentions her passion will help overcome your numerical perfection on your GPA. Because she mentioned, even for grad schools here in Canada, I want to say bachelor's wise, for Canadian students, they probably want you to have at least a 3.7 out of 4.0. And I've seen this too from my experiences. But for her too, she mentioned that basically her passion for this completely overrode this numerical GPA number, because it's so evident that when you have somebody like that, that's very determined and not willing to give up and just quit when they face some difficulties, of course they're going to figure out a way to get it done, because that's just who they are as a person, right? And I mean, we can see this in the workplace too now, right? I mean, me as somebody who's hiring people too, is I prefer somebody who's maybe they don't have the perfect skill set to begin with, but they're eager, they're willing to learn, they're willing to be humble. They want to grow in order to get that skill set. And I think that's just such a great attitude to have.
Absolutely. I would totally agree. And that was a great point she made in the quote that I like from that one that she said, don't be dissuaded by the fact that you're not perfect on paper. And I think that's so true for so many of us that have careers that we're happy with now, is that, when we go to apply for a job, we know where all the holes in our resume and our CVR. And so we're just damn, they're probably not going to pick me. There's going to be somebody, I'll just try this anyway. And then you end up getting picked. And to add to your point, yeah, I've seen that before too. The people that have good interpersonal skills are good to work with in teams. And she even mentioned that in another part that, it's incredibly important to be able to work in a team and have good team dynamics. Those are the people that get hired over the ones with the sky high. If you have a sky high GPA and you can do that, then boom, you're golden. But if it's one or the other, it's usually the person that is able to work in teams. And because you have to think from the hiring manager's perspective, if you hire somebody, and it's a long-term investment, you hire them on the basis that they're probably going to be with your company forever. And if they're there Monday to Friday working 8 hours a day, they might be spending more time with you than with their family, for the rest of their lives. So that you got to be somebody that people want to work with, because they won't want to spend 25 years with you if you're not. So, I mean, you just, in the interview, people are going to be able to tell this. So this is a skill you have to work on early on for sure.
Totally agree with you. And I think, okay, that kind of leads me into probably my final quote I'll talk about from my notes is, the quote is, figure out what you want to do and don't stop, right? It's just, it's that simple. And I think, it's easier said than done. It's a lot easier said than done. I think even for say a lot of people who on paper make it seem like they have a lot of their life and stuff figured out. I think there's a lot of gaps and spaces in between that perhaps is not so evident to people on the outside, which I think is also influenced by say social media and other things like that, right? But I think that having this as kind of a life attitude or mentality can definitely help us in the longer run, because I mean, we only are on this planet one time essentially, right? As we know of. apparently. And so like, you want to try to maximize your experience here for like whatever that means to you. Like if you want to like probably find more fulfillment out of your life, like, yeah, you probably want to find a career or some type of passions that really inspire you. And it might not even have to be your career, it might even just be a side project, like a podcast, like TrailBlazers, but yeah, so if you guys have made it this far, thank you for listening. Tyler, any more thoughts on Karina's content? What do you think?
Just 2 more points that I had. It's funny, the last quote I was going to mention is the one that you just said. I thought that was a great way that she capped things off there by saying that. That's totally true. But I just want to finish off by saying huge shout out to Launch Canada, the initiative that she mentioned. All those students, they're doing such a great job trying to launch rockets and stuff and go down to the competitions in the US, and they're apparently just killing it down there. They're doing great. So if anybody from that is listening, big hats off to you guys. That's a huge accomplishment. And then just the point that she made, I like this story that she told about how she didn't know if she wanted to go to U of T or to Toulouse, and she flipped the coin for it, and the coin said that she was going to go to U of T, but then she's like, no, I'm going to go to Toulouse instead. And I think that's so good, because I think a lot of things that we tell ourselves that are up in the air, we don't know what we want to do, deep down in our gut, we know exactly what we want to do. And I think it's about having the courage to kind of acknowledge that this is kind of what I want to do. There's very, very little uncertainty deep down when you kind of uncover those layers of yourselves. And I think that's a good way to bring it right to the surface, is like making a life decision by flipping a coin. And then I think I'm going to go do the other things. So no, definitely lots of great wisdom from her in here. And, also the rocket overview. Thanks to Karina for that. So, I definitely learned some things. I think a lot of people will learn some things by checking out the slides on rockets. So that was a great interview, and we were really happy to have her on the show.
Totally. Yeah, I got to learn a little bit of rocket stuff too. Sure, I'm a machine learning engineer, but I couldn't tell you probably the first thing about how a rocket works. So, but now thanks to Karina, I know just enough to have an in-depth conversation, maybe. But anyways, we just want to thank you for listening thus far. If you're still here, you know what to do. You see that like button there, just go and give that a smash. And then as well, that subscribe button there too. You can probably go hit that. We'd be very thankful if you did that. It helps us grow the channel and helps us continue to interview awesome people like Karina and give you guys some great content, just kind of, so you can think about and help your growth as well too. Tyler, any other thoughts, or what do you think?
No, man, that's good. Catch us on Spotify, catch us on YouTube, and keep your eye out for more content. And of course, let us know if there's anybody that you want to see on the podcast, if there's any questions you want us to ask, if there's any format changes, whatever you think we can do better, just let us know. Dave and I are open to constructive criticism, and we'll do our best to adapt. So with that, we'll see you guys next time, and have a good one.
All right. See you.